this episode of the Route 77 podcast, we will focus on our second pillar, anchors. We believe that just like a boat needs a strong anchor to remain secure during a storm, our lives also require a solid anchor to keep us grounded. We will explore what it means to have an anchor in our lives and how it can help us navigate the storms and uncertainties we encounter as single individuals. Welcome to Route 77 Ministries podcast. I am Natasha, your host for today. Today's episode is about our pillar anchor and what it means to be anchored and how to live that out. I am here today with Monique.
Hello.
And David.
Hello.
Let us begin. Anchored is our second pillar, and we define it like this. Everyone is anchored on something. If that thing is not God, then it has become an idol in your life. If that thing is not God, then it is subject to failure. There is a temptation to make marriage the goal of one's life and give it importance and priority, which God never meant it to have. Anchoring ourselves to God alone allows us to live our lives on a solid foundation that will not shift or crumble as we journey towards heaven.
The Cambridge Dictionary defines anchored as making something or someone stay in one position or fasten him or her firmly. So basically it means to secure firmly so it cannot be shaken or moved. But when you do that to something that is fallible,
the basic idea is that so many times we take things in our life and we think that this is what we need to do. We have to do this in order to be successful or happy or anything. And many times people will take marriage as that. So we were born, we go to school, we graduate, we get married, we have kids. And so it's part of the progression. We make even this progression, this expectation, the goal of our lives. And it becomes an idol because it's something that we've put all of our focus, all of our attention, all of our hope in. And if it doesn't come around, we don't know what to do with ourselves because this thing has failed us.
Yep.
And even sometimes when you do get married, it doesn't live up to what you
expected.
Yeah, what your expectations of it has been. And it fails just in that it's not all the things that you thought it would be in your life.
Then you're pretty much putting your anchor in, shifting sand. And you could actually end up going adrift. And I get that. When I was in high school, my goal, like everybody said, what do you want to do when you leave high school? And I thought, well, I'll be a nurse or maybe I'll be a veterinarian. But really my ideal was to get married, get that house, the white picket fence, and the kids and the dog. And that was going to be my life. That didn't work out at all in any way, shape, or form. But I gave up becoming a nurse. I gave up becoming a veterinarian because it was a secondary thing for me. It was not as important as being in a relationship and being married. So then I ended up going to a technical school and learning business administration. And now I sit in front of a computer dealing with accounting numbers, which is a whole heck of a lot of fun. Sure. Yeah. Okay. It's good. And I'm glad for the job, but it really wasn't my real career goal. And there was that one time when I wanted to go, I was actually accepted at Langara College to do computer programming. And I was talked out of it by a friend who said, if you go there, then you're going to be so busy, you're never going to meet anybody, you're never going to get married. She's honed in on that one goal that I never let go of.
And that's the same for me. I was always taught that the highest calling of a woman was wife and mother. And I was okay with that. I wanted that. And the only reason I went to university, a Christian university, was to find a husband. Only reason. And 5 years later, no husband and a lot of debt and courses that I probably didn't. I know I didn't try my hardest and I passed and I got my degrees, but it was very disappointing because I thought that's what you do. You go and you get married. But it's hard to do that when there's 4 girls for every guy. Most of the guys don't make it out without getting married. The odd one does. But
it's still the same today.
the girls, the women go there. There's not enough men to go around. And I came back home to the farm and I helped on the farm, which my dad needed as my brothers went off to college. And I didn't know what to do. I was like, okay, I'm on the farm. I'm very much an introvert. So going out and trying new things is not in my comfort zone. And I was in a very small church in a rural area. And the only thing I did pretty much off the farm and outside of church was soccer and trying to find someone who's a believer. And it was very difficult and someone that I was attracted to. And that was my age. It seems to always be someone my age was not very common. On my year, there's always a gap, it seemed, of people my age. So I spent my 20s just working on the farm, thinking, yeah, this is what I should do and be here. I enjoyed the farm, but I always was trying to find that person to get married. Like I was on that many Christian dating websites, just trying to make something work. I'd go on, I'd be like, okay, I'm not going to be so picky. I'm going to find somebody. And it's just, I don't know, it never worked out. And that kind of left me very open for when my ex met me to be willing to look past a lot of red flags because the one goal I had was to be married. And then when I did get married, it was very unhealthy, very abusive. And when I got to about 2019, we had been married for 9 years at that point. My ex told me he didn't want to be married anymore. And that never has the visual of an anchor or being tossed around at sea been more applicable to what I felt. I felt like I was in a little dinghy raft thing in the middle of the ocean in a storm. I had no foundation. And even though I was in an unhealthy relationship, I had put the fact that I was married, that I was a wife as the most important thing. Like no matter what else, I was married and that's what mattered. And so when that got threatened, when my ex was wanted to take that away, I had no foundation, no purpose, no calling, nothing. Going through all of that really opened my eyes to where I needed to anchor myself, where my foundation needed to be. And it took a couple of years of counseling and church and God working in my heart to really understand that while marriage is a good thing, it's not God. And by putting all my faith and hope and purpose into a creation of God's, which was marriage, that I created as an idol and it fell apart and I had no foundation.
Yep. Our pastor, Justin, he says that marriage, like these things, are not in themselves a bad thing. They're actually a good thing. But he says, when you take this good thing and you make it a God thing, then you turn it into a bad thing. And that's what we have done with those kind of feelings. In case you didn't know, the three of us, we are Christians, but we go to a church called Gateway CRC. If you want to know what their mission statement is and who they are, and they actually have live stream if you're interested in watching any of their sermons, you can find them at gatewaycrc.org. And it's a really good church. And I've been there since 96. As a non-church going person, it's become my home and the people there become my family. And through all that, I've brought David and Natasha, and now they're all a part of it as well. We're a great big family there.
Yeah, like definitely your pastor talking about taking a good thing, making a God thing becomes a bad thing is definitely something that resonated specifically in this area, especially when thinking about this ministry and the pillars we wanted. The anchor, the foundation was so important.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it really reminds me of where it says in Matthew 7:24-27, when there's the parable about like building your house on the rock. It says, everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell and the floods came and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain fell and the floods came and the winds blew and beat against that house and it fell. And great was the fall of it. I really feel like I was that foolish person building my house on the foundation of of marriage instead of God.
Yeah, because that's where ultimately where we need to find our anchor on. We need to anchor ourselves to God. And the only way to get to know God is through his holy scriptures.
Exactly.
It's pretty solid what you guys are talking about, just re-anchoring everyone, making sure that the act of something, like for example, I know friends who ended up worshiping the act of praying, and eventually you got to be very careful because you can get very deep into the idea that I'm praying to God, but are you really? Are you just praying just because you are beginning to believe in the act of praying, or are you praying because you actually are praying to believe in God? Kind of thing, if you understand what I'm trying to get at.
Yes.
So so you can do all these things in the name of God, but you have to be aware that you could be worshiping the act of doing these things and not actually God.
Yeah, I guess it depends upon if you're the kind of person who prays in front of a whole bunch of people and you use all these great big words and all this wonderful eloquence and stuff like that, and that's become your God. You're praying more to have people look at you and admire your eloquence of words and stuff like that. And yeah, no, that's not how it works. Because I don't know about you guys, but there's sometimes when I pray and depending upon how I'm feeling, and sometimes when I'm really struggling, that it feels like the prayers, they don't even go past the ceiling. God, do you even hear me? And that's when you're basing everything on your feelings. But I know that God does hear every single prayer that is ever uttered in his name.
The idea of praying in public is what you said earlier, is where you're getting at. But there's a deeper root too, where you could be alone and still idolize the act of praying or the act of worshiping because it gets you some kind of high. And I know friends who react or who live their lives around this idea that if they do a particular action like praying or worshiping something, even if it's God, they end up getting this high and then they anchor themselves to this high instead of the actual to Christ. Even if it's not in public, it can be in private too. And then when it becomes private, then it's very hard to recognize exactly what you're worshiping. And so I think a lot of this is that's why if you are single, having a community to rely back onto may open your eyes or help you or guide you through the time or have you realize, oh, wait, maybe I'm not worshiping God. I'm worshiping something like an act of worshiping or something similar like that.
Yeah, exactly. There's so many things, not just marriage. There's so many things that you can base your foundation on that will fail you. It will fail you in the long term. And David, you're saying like with the act of prayer and the feeling, the emotions that come with it, and eventually it doesn't do enough. Like we all know that with any type of emotional high, you can never do the same thing over and over to get that high. It needs to be constantly changing and getting bigger and different and better sort of thing. Not better, but
It's like
grander.
the alcoholic who has to have that one more drink because he's lost that high.
Even like with pornography, where you watch some pictures at the beginning, but then it's got to become video, and then it goes
More graphic and more.
yeah, darker and deeper. And even when it comes to emotions, I think that the studies have shown that that honeymoon phase of marriage will last only up to 2 years, not definitely 2 years, but up to 2 years, and then the emotions just aren't there. The same heightened
Euphoria.
the euphoric part of the honeymoon stage. And that's not to like discourage people. It's just the fact of life. It's the fact of biology.
You can't sustain that.
No, it's just not there. Things change slowly. And yeah, emotions become deeper and greater, especially between a husband and wife. If you are doing it, and if you're
In a healthy
in a healthy
relationship.
relationship, that high that we sometimes look for, it's going to be ever fleeting because the same thing over and over will never fill it.
The funny thing is with the abusive relationships, that high is something that comes and goes because you go through that cycle of abuse. So you're always waiting. You get that honeymoon phase where everything is all sweet.
Or love bombing.
Yeah, the love bombing. And then all of a sudden you're in that.
It goes love bombing, then you're in the tension stage, then there's explosion, then it goes back to the love bombing. And what actually it does is it creates an addictive atmosphere where you are constantly craving that love bombing stage where it feels good.
Yeah.
So it creates an addictive cycle.
And that can last for a long time if you don't get out of that addictive cycle.
Yeah. It's how people get stuck in there.
Yeah. Even on the Bible, and I've heard this where people have become where they worship the Bible, they worship the word, the book,
Yes.
the paper and stuff like that. And they're waving it around and it's no, that's the Bible is supposed to teach you about God. And
I
oh,
think also a really good example, Monique, of what you're saying is the religious leaders of the time of Jesus.
yes,
You could seriously see and how they ended up becoming. They even say that like the law is God, so their eventual worship is to the law of
right.
Moses over what Christ or what Jesus was bringing forth.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And which is what eventually developed within the Catholic Church, where the Pope became law. The
Yeah.
Pope's word became law, even over Scripture.
Yeah.
Over God almost, because
Yeah.
it would be over Scripture. So if you can see this cycle of this happening, because we've been learning about the Reformation in my class, and we've been reading a book on martyrs of the Reformation. So you could, when we're reading our Bible in a year, so we're actually seeing a lot of the Pharisees. We're reading about that, and then we read the martyrs of the Reformation, and we see a lot of correlation between the people.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that there's not Christians within the Catholic Church. I think there's people who do believe in the salvation of Jesus within there, but definitely
And it's not
the
just in
leadership.
the Catholic Church, because I know of other churches who will do the same thing, where they become so legalistic that they follow the letter rather than the worship of God himself.
Or like the leaders, what the leaders say go.
Yep. Yep.
And you can't have any sort of communication with them about anything even the Bible says, because what they interpreted is the right way. And
Yeah. And it's very sad because a lot of people, they get damaged in those kind of churches and then they walk away and they don't want to have anything to do with God anymore because they equate that as, well, if they're like this, then God must be like that too. But God is not like that at all.
No.
No. And Jesus even came against a lot of those strict laws and stuff that the Pharisees at his time were imparting on people, saying, you can't do this, you can't do that, you must go, you must do this, wash your hands every 5 seconds, kind of thing.
The Pharisees were also very heavy on anchoring those who are already righteous or what they considered righteous and believers.
Yeah.
He held a lot of, I don't want to say hatred, but a lot of, I don't know, for the lack of a right word, I say hatred, but they seem to push away a lot of people who were sinners, who were not righteous.
A lot of disdain.
Yeah, disdain and
Yeah.
stuff. It probably created a huge rift in what was considered an anchor and what everyone was anchoring towards.
And that leads us to our first pillar where, we've accepted, because we don't want to have that kind of an attitude toward anybody, where that says that we are better than you are because of whatever.
Yeah, all those who are saved are children of God, and
Yep.
how their life is compared to mine is of no consequence. And
No.
the fact that if they're rich and I'm poor, or vice versa, or they work as a CEO and I work in agriculture, like it doesn't, there's
No.
no difference. And even when they're talking about Corinthians in our church services right now, we're talking about Corinthians, and they're talking about how in the church of Corinth, which was small anyway, they had split themselves into the rich side and the poor side. So you had the rich people sit on one side and the poor people sit on another side, and the rich people would have food and the poor people didn't. And you're in a church, and that's
So wrong.
yeah. So
Sure.
they were using societal standards as more of a foundation than biblical standards.
I remember this one study group that I was in. I don't know how many people have heard of the Alpha group, but there was one where they were asked, if you were to, on a scale, like say, take one of your walls or your doorpost, and you've got levels of degree of sinfulness, people who are really bad and people who are really good. So where would you put the murderers and the rapists and stuff? And everybody's going way down at the bottom. And then who would you put at the top? Well, they had Mother Teresa or Billy Graham, this stuff like that. And he says, no, the standard is God, who is as high as the moon. Now, where are you sitting? When you look at it that way, we're all in the same position. No one is ever better or worse. We're all sinners needing a savior.
Exactly. And then that's the only foundation we can anchor ourselves to the only place that will never shift and never change is God and Jesus, who is God as our Savior. So there's one passage I'd like to read from Hebrews chapter 6, starting in verse 13. For when God made a promise to Abraham, since he had no one greater by whom to swear, he swore by himself, saying, surely I will bless you and multiply you. And thus Abraham, having patiently waited, obtained the promise. For people swear by something greater than themselves, and in all their disputes, an oath is final for confirmation. For when God desired to show more convincingly to the heirs of the promise the unchangeable character of his purpose, he guaranteed it with an oath, so that by two unchangeable things, in which it is impossible for God to lie, we who have fled for refuge might have strong encouragement to hold fast to hope set before us. We have this as a sure and steadfast anchor of the soul, a hope that enters into the inner place behind the curtain, where Jesus has gone as a forerunner on our behalf, having become a high priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. So there's a lot to unpack in that if we were to really look at it. But the main part is that God could not swear by anything outside of himself because he was the highest. There's nothing higher. We say, I swear to God, or I swear on my grandmother's grave, or something that we feel is important to us. God could not swear on anything higher than himself. He was the foundation of all of his statements, all of his promises. And it even says it's unchangeable, is that it is impossible for God to lie. So everything that he says is truth. It will come. It has come. It will be. It is. There's nothing outside of that. And then so in this surety, it says that we have encouragement to hold fast to the hope set before us. So the hope of heaven, the hope of salvation that he has given to us. We have this as a sure and steadfast anchor to the soul. That's the ultimate thing that we were looking for. Where do we anchor our soul, our inner being, our purpose, our calling, our life? And there's so many things people would say, oh, what do you want to do when you grow up? And you're not going to do, I'm going to be anchored to God. It's a good answer, but it's not really the answer we're looking for. But if you start there, whenever you build a house or whatever, you always start with a foundation. So there's a bottom part, a main part, a part that never changes, that should never shift. And you need to start there and build on that.
It was funny because in the Bible, they actually called Jesus the cornerstone,
Yeah.
which is part of the foundation of a house is the cornerstone. And if that cornerstone isn't set right, the whole house falls apart.
Exactly. And so in our lives, trying to figure out as a single person, as a married person, wherever you find yourself, if the purpose, the calling, your entire being isn't set on something that won't shift, it's set on God, then it's subject to failure. Everything that you build upon is subject to failure. And you see what happens when a foundation crumbles. It doesn't just a few stones that come down, it's the entire thing. And that's what happened to me. Like everything in my life came tumbling down around me that I had thought I'd built up. And then you look at it and you realize that you were like I was like a child building like a pillow fort. And it just went poof, it all fell down.
Mine was like the proverbial house of cards. The wind came and blew and scattered the cards to the four corners of the earth, because mine ended up with a much more traumatic end that caused my husband to be thrown in jail for 3 years. And I was left wondering what the heck happened and why did my life all of a sudden crash down around me. The funny thing is that during that time, my mom, who is not a Christian, bless her heart, and I love her dearly, but she asked me, she says, how can you still believe in God after all of this? And I had no answer at that time. I'd barely been a Christian for a year when all of that happened, maybe into my second year. But there is a song that from Mercy Me that is called Bring the Rain. And that song really resonates with me because it's the same thing after everything that I've been through. But God is He is my strength. He is the peace when I have no peace. During that time too, people were saying like, how can you still be standing? I'm only standing because God is holding me up.
You don't see the real,
Yeah.
the real person holding me up.
Yeah. You don't see what's really holding me up, what's really wrapping his arms around me and saying, I've got you. It's okay. You can get through this. And people say, well, you were so strong. You went through so much. And I'm going, I am not strong. I am not strong. It's God who, through my weakness, gave me strength to be able to keep going. If I did not anchor my life to him, I probably would have fallen apart, shattered. I could definitely see myself going, either turning to alcohol to drown my sorrows or turning to drugs to make it all go away. Yeah. But God gave me the strength to keep walking every day, one step at a time, one day at a time. You can keep going.
I'll even say this. People sometimes ask, do you wish that you hadn't married your ex, or that because you went through such a time or gone through what I'd done? And I say, you know what? I don't wish the time back. And I know that's not the same for every person. But for me, the development that has come through this is something I would never want to lose. I don't want to be the person I was when I was 30. I want to be the person I am now. And sometimes God uses pain to bring about something better. And sometimes God has to destroy a foundation that's false to build up one that's true. If you want to know if a foundation is good, you need to put pressure on it. Or if the anchor is going to stay, you can put it down. But if it's not really firmly in the ground, it's not going to hold your boat down.
And see what the hurricane does to your boat.
Right. And so sometimes you can't just assume that it's going to stand up. And sometimes if it doesn't, then you need to do something different. And for me, that's what happened. It did shatter a lot of things in my life, but it built things back so much better. And if any of what I went through can save people from having to experience that themselves and instead start growing and building that foundation, having that anchor firmly put in now, then it was definitely worth it. It was worth it for me personally. I'd like it to be worth it to other people too. And when you're single, you have to really look at what your purpose in life is. And if you go, oh, I feel a calling to be a wife and a mother or a father and a husband, if you're not married or you do not have kids at this moment, then you are not called to that in this moment. And so assuming that you're called to something that you don't actually have, like you might work towards it, putting yourself out there and going meeting people and whatnot and looking for somebody that's great. But I thought I was called to be a wife and a mother. And yet now I feel like that wasn't my calling. So feeling something deep inside of you, even feeling something like that doesn't necessarily mean that's what's going to happen. And it's better to refocus yourself and talk about, what am I going to do now with my life? What am I going to build on this foundation? And you got to take your now.
It might also be a really good idea to ask yourself if that is what you think your purpose is, to be married and have kids. Ask yourself where that came from, because I know many people who have for years and years and years. People keep telling me, oh, I'm going to meet the soulmate that God has set aside for me, and that I have this great person and I'm going to be married and I'm going to have kids. And all of a sudden they're in their 50s. They're not married. Kids are not even a thing anymore, because trust me, as a 50-year-old, the idea of having kids running around my feet, don't like you. And maybe it's rooted in something else. And for me, this is what it was, it's where my sense of worth was, because I believed that if I didn't have a husband who loved me, then I wasn't worth being loved. And if I didn't have a whole bunch of children to love me, that's where my sense of purpose, I needed to be loved. I needed to have that. And there was a song, and I can't find it. Somehow it's disappeared, I think. There was one line in that song that said, if you're looking for love, you're looking for God. And I would say that to myself, and I'm going, yeah, well, God's way out there and I'm down here and I have nobody. But God will give you other means of having companionship outside of a marriage relationship. But you don't have to have somebody that you're tied to for the rest of your life, especially if it makes you unhappy, when you can have good friendships that can be just as supportive, just as encouraging, and just as, I want to use the right word because I don't want people to misconstrue what the relationship is it could be a type of intimacy that is based on like sisterhood or brotherhood or that kind of thing. Because if you think it's, what about the sex thing? That's so fleeting.
Yeah.
How much of your life is really that? A percentage?
Yeah. And that will definitely be a good topic to discuss in another podcast.
A lot of this conversation reminds me of just the parable Jesus said about the sower in the field, where he would plant the seed and the seed grows depending on where it's planted. That's ended up being the foundation. And if the foundation isn't good, then its plant can wither and the roots don't hatch out or grow and the fruit is not plentiful. But there's many other parables too that represent, and based on what you guys talking to the woman at the well, the Samaritan Jesus came to, who had 5 husbands and didn't know where she was and was lost and being anchored. Where do I anchor myself, to my husbands or not? And then Jesus came in and said, doesn't matter how many times your anchor connects to a wrong portion or the wrong foundation you've anchored yourself to. Doesn't matter how many times you have done this, I will always still be there. The foundation and my anchor is still always open, that you can always re-anchor yourself if need be.
That's definitely a good point. We don't want to go, oh, I missed my chance.
Yeah, never. There's
It's always open.
as long as you're on this side of the grass, the chance is always there.
But also another very important thing is that those who are already anchored, God seeks out those who are not anchored. And again, it's the sheep parable where he says, if you have 100 sheep, one goes astray, do you leave your 99 sheep? Kind of thing. And he goes after the one. So a huge portion is that you have the 99 anchored sheep. And then that one sheep that was anchored becomes unanchored again. So there's always a chance where the anchor could falter, or the foundation you're on you could jump off of it or leave it in a sense, but you're always able to come back to it. And God will always chase that one stray anchor, or always will try to fix that one stray anchor that may not necessarily be tight, and he will retighten it.
It could be that the anchor was solidly, but the chain broke.
Lots of object lessons with that. But yeah, it's definitely a good point, because if something happens and you go, what happened? Did God fail you? It's no, he never fails. And there's more, the most likely object is that failure. Point of failure would be myself.
Yeah.
Because we're sinful people bound
Yeah.
by sin, and we have to fight through it at times. And sometimes we fail.
You get more than one chance to re-anchor yourself. That's my point, is that you don't just get one, you get many.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, yeah. And we don't ever want anyone to think that they've blown it, because there's no such thing.
No,
Because we all, the things that we all fall, some of us hit the pavement a lot harder than others.
yep. And even like we look at when Jesus died between thieves, like there was the thief on the cross that was saved moments before death, essentially.
Yep.
There's no such thing as too late.
Funny that you mentioned that because Pastor Justin actually said that in a sermon today.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he said that if you think that baptism is the most important thing or whatever, think of the thief on the cross. He wasn't baptized. He didn't have the schooling. He didn't have all the accolades that said that he was the one who could make it into heaven. He was not going there until he turned to Jesus, and Jesus said, today you will be with me in paradise.
So he anchored to the solid foundation right at the very end. And that's some people, it's a journey for everybody. And it doesn't have to be, oh, it's too late. He'll never accept me. I'm not worth it. And all those things. Like there's no such thing. Those are excuses.
Don't think that, I can wait till I die. Because I had a cousin who was 36 years old who went to sleep and never woke up.
Yep. We don't know how long our time is. No.
And then that's also the heart too.
Yep.
If you intend to wait till you die, then your heart is not with Christ.
Yeah.
Let me put it this way. If you come to Christ It'll be a time where you're probably not going to expect it.
That's
And
true.
then it'll be strong too. So you'll be like, I'm going to wait till my end to come to Christ. But then your heart is not with Christ to begin with.
Mm.
And Christ will do something within your lifespan or within your time on earth that would be so shattering that it would be unexpected and you would end up coming to Christ right then and there. So it's like you plan to come to Christ, but that's not how it works.
God has his own plan.
Yes, God knows when you come to him, come to follow him, when you anchor on him, and he has a plan set and knows that plan. And so he'll continue to provide you with opportunities to come to Christ, but he knows exactly when your heart will be set on coming to Christ.
Very true. Very true.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. And that's funny because when I think about my own, because I didn't grow up in the church, so I know the day that I had accepted Christ. And yeah, you're right. Totally unexpected. I was not planning on doing that. And it just kind of happened. I'm going, oh, all right then. And it wasn't because anybody preached at me. I was home all by myself.
Yeah, like I said,
Watching
I was
TV.
what 6 or 7 in bed at night, just contemplating the grandness of life. I guess as a 6 or 7-year-old can.
A deep thinker for a life.
Combination of the dark and all the stuff that I learned up until that point culminated.
Yeah. And then your mom says, yeah, whatever, go to bed. Stay awake.
Yeah, once again, I was a boundary pushing child, so it's definitely not her fault.
No, but these are all things that you sit there and go, yeah, because I had no plan on becoming a Christian in any way, shape, or form. I was going to church with a friend and it was just like, oh, it's something to do on a Sunday morning and whatever. I did not know what that meant even. I didn't even know what that meant. To say this, what they call the sinner's prayer. I had no notion. And all of a sudden I just did. My eyes opened. Yeah.
There's definitely.
The veil was torn.
Yes, when your eyes are open, you can't help but respond. So
Yeah, I like to think about Matthew a lot, the tax collector that Christ came and asked to follow, because Matthew had a good life, but he was hated by everyone because he was a tax collector. And he was a Jew. He was God's people at the same time. And he was very logical, you would assume, because he was a tax collector. He was very logical and good with mathematics, just to calculate all that fun stuff. But when God came to him and asked him to follow him, he was probably baffled. This is not how my life expected to turn. I expected to live in a wealthy, cozy house and not travel and relying on someone I barely knew.
Throw everything away and just follow it.
Yeah. Matthew is a really good example of someone having lots of wealth and having a good, solid, relaxing life, because tax collectors made a lot of money. And he's a good example of one willing to follow Christ and to give up everything he ever had, all the comfort, all the wealth and everything, to re-anchor himself onto something that necessarily didn't bring easy life. It was hard.
Yeah. We started watching The Chosen.
Yes. I love that.
it only just started. It was on our we need to watch this list, and then so we just started the first season.
Yep, I watched it a long time ago, and I'm rewatching it right now because they have season 3 episodes coming out.
Everything they see there is not going to be exactly what happened because we don't know exactly what happened.
It's fillers. A lot of it is filling.
So there's
fillers.
creative license to the fact. What I really appreciate about it is that it reminds us that these were real people.
Yeah.
With real lives.
Yeah.
Real feelings, real experiences. They felt pain, they felt sorrow, they felt everything that we do. And sometimes we forget that when we read the Bible, we read scripture, we just see it as a story, or it's hard to connect with historical people sometimes.
The book can be sometimes just 2D.
Yeah. And
It's black and white. As soon as you add color to it, everything comes alive.
And The Chosen just helps you to remind yourself that these were real life people.
Yeah.
And when you read the Bible, it really helps to open that up a bit more.
Yeah, you kind of look at it with different eyes because you go, he was actually a person. He was a person who walked on this earth, lived and breathed.
He was just like us. Just normal.
Suffered, who had pains, who might have swore or whatever because he got mad, stubbed his toe, he got beaten on, he got pushed around. But Matthew was a real life person, and he wrote the first gospel.
Yeah, we definitely encourage people to give chosen
A chance.
Give
Yeah.
chosen a chance, definitely.
This is not a promotion for
You can
any of
watch
it.
it.
This is not.
And you can
We're
watch
just
it for free on the Angel app.
yeah. It's completely free.
Yep. Completely free. And done well. Yeah. Filming, the cinematography is really well done. Very well done.
On that note, let me just finish our podcast with a couple of verses from Psalm 62, verse 5 through 7. I guess 3 verses. For God alone, O my soul, wait in silence, for my hope is from him. He only is my rock and my salvation, my fortress. I shall not be shaken. On God rests my salvation and my glory. My mighty rock, my refuge is God. So just as you're going through your single life, start with the blocks that are in the foundation. God is definitely the worthwhile foundation rock.
Always remember that you have more than one anchor, so that you can, if you lose your anchor, misplace or your anchor falters, you always have many.
God doesn't leave you unanchored. And just as an aside, we will be having the website up and running
In the future.
In the future, Route 77. But right now you can follow us on Facebook, Route 77 Ministries. We will be posting little blog spots and stuff like that. And we will let you know when our website is up and running so that you can check it out when it comes available.
In our next podcast, we're going to step away from the pillars just for one episode, and we're going to talk about Valentine's Day. That's obviously singles' favorite holiday.
Yep.
So we're going to talk about Valentine's Day and how we deal with that as single people. Thank you for listening.
Yes.
And
Thank you.
see you next time.
Thank you very much and have a great, blessed week.
Thank you for tuning into the Route 77 podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on Facebook and Instagram for more content. In our next episode, we'll take a break from discussing the pillars and focus on navigating Valentine's Day as a single person. In the meantime, remember to embrace and enjoy your single life to the fullest.